Hello everybody, it's Mr. G coming at you with another Misconceptions in History. And today we are doing the second part on the history of the aircraft carrier. We're going to be looking at basically pre-World War II up until the nuclear age today. So let's go ahead and get at it. In the last video I talked about how the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 limited the production of the aircraft carrier. So a lot of nations began converting their existing cruisers, things like that, into aircraft carriers, and only a few of them had really built any purpose-built aircraft carriers. However, by the time we get towards the end of the treaty and towards the stirrings of problems in Europe and Asia, we actually start to see some major development changes with the aircraft carrier in the 1930s. One of the biggest of those is the folding wing aircraft, which, honestly, when you think about it, why didn't they think of this sooner when they started developing these aircraft carriers? But the idea of creating single-wing airplanes that had folding wings was revolutionary. They required a lot of engineering to be able to not only fold the wings, but be able to create a system that could support those wings after they've been straightened out and hold them in place so they wouldn't just fall apart while the plane was flying. Additionally, with this new development of folding wing aircraft, the British were the first ones to come up with something called the armored flight deck, which was basically to heavily reinforce the area they would store the aircraft to prevent any sort of problems like explosions, attacks, things like that, and protect all the aircraft inside. This is why the British aircraft carriers didn't take as much damage as the American ones during World War II. Next, the United States, noticing that there was war coming but didn't have an aircraft carrier fleet, developed what was known as the light aircraft carrier. Now, these light carriers were created as a stopgap measure. The earlier ones were not purpose-built. They were converted out of cruisers. However, because of their speed, they were able to keep up with main fleets and provide additional support. The British followed suit with their own light carriers and basically attributed them to the rest of their Commonwealth nations as well, such as Australia and Canada. The British also created what was known as the merchant aircraft carriers as a stopgap measure as they were trying to build up their aircraft carrier fleet. And these were civilian vessels, so oil tankers, cargo freighters, things like that, that basically had a flat deck put on them and were still commanded by an almost entirely civilian crew. These ships had extremely limited capabilities, but their job was strictly to protect cargo fleets. The American counterpoint to the British merchant aircraft carrier was the American escort carriers. And the escort carriers were nowhere near as fast or as large as a standard U.S.-built carrier. They were roughly about a third of the size. However, their role was mostly an anti-submarine and later on a kind of a convoy escort. And they actually did an amazing job as a convoy escort. Now, the 1930s also saw several nations who had not been a part of earlier aircraft carrier development realized the aircraft carrier was going to become important and begin rapid development. Both Germany and Italy began to convert whatever they could possibly get their hands on to develop their own aircraft carrier fleets for the upcoming war they knew was inevitable. And while everyone saw the importance of the aircraft carrier, they were still relegated to more of a support role at the beginning of what we consider to be World War II. And even things such as the HMS Glory as seen here was actually sunk in 1940 by a battle cruiser, which showed a lot of naval people that, this new aircraft carrier probably wasn't going to be as big of a deal as they thought it was going to be. However, the aircraft carrier would actually prove its worth for the first time at the Battle of Taranto. Now, the importance of this battle is the fact that this is the first time we're going to see an all-aircraft ship-to-ship naval attack in history. And the British actually managed to incapacitate 3 out of the 6 Italian battleships that were in harbor at the time, at the loss of only 2 of their attacking aircraft, thus proving the vulnerability of battleships that Billy Mitchell had told the world about in the early 1920s. And followed that up a few months later, where British aircraft carriers helped cripple the Bismarck before she was sunk, showing again that aircraft carriers could provide support against the heaviest and most powerful of ships in the world. Then later that year, in December of 1941, we see the most impressive sneak attack ever used by aircraft carriers, in which the Japanese aircraft carrier fleet decimates the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. And this attack, the Japanese continued to show the vulnerability of the battleship by incapacitating 7 out of the 8 battleships there, with the 8th one, Arizona, being completely destroyed. For the next couple of months, there's a series of small skirmishes involving aircraft carriers in the Pacific. That is until April of 1942, in which we see the Doolittle raid, which is significant because we launched Army bombers off of a Navy aircraft carrier, which had never been done before. And while it didn't do any major damage to Japan, it showed the basic inevitability that long-range attacks could be carried out from a aircraft carrier, and that this was going to be the future. About a month later, we have the Battle of Coral Sea, which is the first carrier-to-carrier battle, in which we see airplanes from two separate carriers directly attacking each other. While the Japanese technically win this battle, it becomes more of a Pyrrhic victory as they had too many losses as a result of their win. And 1 month later, we have the Battle of Midway, in which a more decisive victory is won by the United States, and all four of the Japanese aircraft carriers that were part of this attack are completely destroyed. Now, there would not be another major aircraft carrier battle in World War II until the Battle of Philippine Sea in 1944. Combine this with the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and we see the end of Japanese aircraft carrier operations for World War II, as the remainder of their fleet would remain in port. This would also be the end of the battleship era, as we see both battleships, the Yamato-class, the Musashi, and the Yamato sunk in 1944 and 1945, respectively. This meant that from this point forward in history, the aircraft carrier would reign supreme over the battleship. And by the end of 1945, the jet age had arrived for the aircraft carrier, with Eric Winkle Brown landing the first jet-powered aircraft on an aircraft carrier, the HMS Ocean, in 1945. And with the age of jet power came some unusual innovations, such as the rubber deck aircraft carrier, in which they basically put a very heavy layer of rubber on the deck of an aircraft carrier. It didn't catch on, but what did catch on was the angled deck aircraft carrier. This unique feature would allow aircraft to both land and take off from the exact same deck at the exact same time, a feature seen on modern aircraft carriers such as the Nimitz class seen here. Another feature developed post-war would be known as the ski jump ramp, which was basically designed for short takeoff capabilities. This was seen on multiple nations such as British and Russian aircraft carriers. But the biggest innovation to aircraft carrier capabilities came with the nuclear age and the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. These allowed for what some call the supercarrier to be developed, creating these massive ships that could basically circumvent the world without ever needing to refuel, only needing to resupply goods and armament. Now, only two nations operate nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, the United States and France. Following World War II, there was no carrier-to-carrier action again. The Korean War and Vietnam War saw massive amounts of aircraft carrier action. However, these were used to launch bombing and attack sorties from the sea against targets inland. We also saw them use aircraft carrier aircraft in order to control airspace over these territories. It is at this time we see many nations begin developing and working with aircraft carriers. Countries such as the Netherlands and Canada, who would not normally be thought of as having aircraft carrier fleets, did experiment with aircraft carriers. Now, the last time we saw any conflict in which two nations deployed aircraft carriers against each other was the Falklands War. The British deployed the HMS Hermes and the HMS Invincible against Argentina's Vicencio de Mayo. And while no direct attacks occurred between these two groups of aircraft carriers, Argentina does claim to this day that it did manage to damage the HMS Invincible, although there's no evidence for this. As of today, there are 16 nations that operate some type of aircraft carrier, whether that be a helicopter carrier, a light carrier, or a fleet carrier. These nations are Algeria, Australia, Brazil, China, Egypt, France, India, Italy, Japan, Russia, South Korea, Spain, Thailand, Turkey, United Kingdom, and the United States, with Argentina, Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands having been former aircraft carrier operators but have retired their fleets. So there you have it, a brief history of the aircraft carrier. While it is a symbol of power projection to this day, it really hasn't done much other than project power in the last couple of decades. So that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you all the next time.